Welcome to the Plan to Eat podcast, where I interview industry experts about meal planning, food, and wellness to help you answer the question, what's for dinner? Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Plan to Eat podcast. Today, I have a lovely interview to share with Matt Adlard. Matt is a self-taught baker and pastry chef from England. He has been a host and a judge on Food Network shows and BBC shows. He also has a popular YouTube channel, Instagram account. You can find him online talking about baking, teaching people Baking 101. And he has recently written a new cookbook. It's called Bake It Better. So in today's interview, we talk a little bit about the cookbook, talk about his journey as a self-taught pastry chef, as well as just some other advice that he has for gaining confidence in becoming a better baker. And I really enjoyed this conversation with Matt, and I hope that you enjoy it too. Matt, thanks so much for joining me on the podcast today.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So why don't you just give us a little intro and tell us who you are and what you do?
So my name is Matt Adlard. I'm a self-taught pastry chef, influencer, and soon-to-be author. I'm just about to publish my first book, which is called Bake It Better. And I mainly just create pastry content online across my social channels, kind of educating people about the fundamentals of French pastry. I'm really into that, but also I have a very creative side to my baking, which involves a lot of 3D printing and vacuum forming and molding. But yeah, it's just about, I'm really passionate about educating people about baking and pastry.
Yeah, I want to get into a little bit later some of the 3D printing recipes that you've done, because that is really cool. And I don't think I've ever seen other people do that. But first, I want to know a little bit about what got you interested in baking in the first place.
It's a really good question. Well, I have to say off the bat, my dad was a Michelin star chef. So food was always in the family. You know, I grew up above the restaurant. Everything revolved around dad's restaurant and, you know, running up and down and printing menus and waiting to get to school because dad had to do something and get the beef out the freezer, you know, whatever it was, everything was about food. But that really put me off going into food. I never wanted to be a chef or a pastry chef because I saw how hard he worked. And then I was 21, studying at university, was in my final year, and I worked really hard. And to stem the boredom of writing loads of essays, I decided to make a chocolate orange cake. So I used Nigella's recipe. I don't know why I picked baking instead of knitting, or I don't know why it was baking, but that was the hobby I chose, and it was a disaster. Like one of the worst cake I've ever made. I didn't have any equipment, no scale, so I converted everything into teaspoons. So I think I weighed out about 250 teaspoons of sugar. You know, it was crazy. And it was so bad. And I'm a real perfectionist in what I do and quite stubborn. And I really, really want to be great at everything I try, you know, gardening, cocktails, or whatever it is. And so I just had to get better. And so I made it my mission to get better at baking and just taught myself through social media and YouTube videos, Instagram, how to bake, techniques, flavors, everything. I'm really good at Googling. So I'm really good at searching the internet for techniques and recipes. And yeah, I've been an influencer for 8 years now. I've been doing it full time for about 5 years. I've been baking for 11 years now. So it's been a while. I'm a dinosaur in the kind of influencer industry.
So you went from regular university to YouTube university.
Yeah, so I did have a job in between because I wasn't like an influencer off the bat. So I did work in London and I worked in advertising and media. But, you know, I was making no money and working horrendously long hours. Then I kind of started this blog as a bit of fun, and I would go to London. I'd trek across London every weekend with like my KitchenAid and my pans and my spatulas, and I'd go film YouTube videos. I just remember thinking, you know, this is crazy. I'm traveling an hour across London every weekend just to film these videos. I really hope this pays off one day. And it did. It did. You know, it took a while. It took a lot of dedication, but I kind of had that overnight success. You know, in 24 hours, my channel blew up. And from there, it became legitimate. And I was able to turn it into a career.
Wow, that's kind of crazy. You don't hear very many people who have like that as their story.
Yeah, I think back in the day, having that kind of overnight explosion of success was rare. And nowadays, I think it's really feasible if you look at TikToks and Reels. You can go from 0 to 1 million followers in 3 days on TikTok. It's not unheard of. But back in the day on YouTube and Instagram, to get 100,000 subscribers overnight or 100,000 followers, that was tough. And I did it. I had this one video that someone featured me in, and it went so viral on Facebook back when Facebook was like the platform. And I had 2,000 friend requests on Facebook. People were finding everything out about me. It was crazy. And that really boosted me to another level, because once you reach that number of followers, people expect you to be really good at what you're doing. And I still had no idea. I was only 3 years into baking, maybe. And bear in mind, I'm self-taught. So 3 years, that's not 3 years of pastry school. That's 3 years of failing. And so I wasn't really that good, but I had, 200,000 followers. And so people expected me to be really good at what I was doing. And so I had to learn really quickly on the fly how to be a good pastry chef.
Well, not only a pastry chef, but also how to create good YouTube videos and stuff, because that's a different skill completely.
Yeah, I mean, I just got some new cameras today, and I'm unboxing them. I'm thinking, I have no idea. I don't know how to use these. Like, it's completely different to what I've used before. I need mics and diffuse. It's every day is learning. It's way more than just pastry. It's presenting. It's editing. It's negotiating. There is a huge world to this kind of influencer life that people don't necessarily see. And there's actually a lot of skills you learn that I never would have had. I can do 3D designs online. I can edit videos. I can present to people. There's just so many skills that come along with it that isn't just making a cake.
Yeah. Are you a one-man show in that regard? Do you do all your videos and editing and stuff?
Yeah, so my wife actually just started working with me this week. So she came on board because I have an online baking school called Bake It Better, and she kind of specializes in sort of customer management and websites and stuff. So she's taking that on board, which is amazing because it takes a huge load off of me. But yeah, I do everything. I film, I edit, I negotiate, I reply to emails. Everything is me. And I've worked with different people over the years, but no one's as passionate as I am. No one works as hard as I do. So I just end up doing everything myself. But I'm hoping my wife will start, smashing out of the park, and she'll take some stuff off my load.
That's like the downfall of being an entrepreneur, right? Is like nobody else is going to care as much as you care about your own business.
Yeah. And especially in this industry, it's your success is all on you. When I wake up in the morning, no one's telling me to make a blueberry pie or an no one's telling me what to do. You have to have the self-motivation and the ideas and the creativity to grow your brand. And I think it takes you so far, but eventually, if you want to take your career to the next level, you need connections. You need people who know the producers, the Netflixes, the literary agents. You need to reach into that world, because I think creating content you can be good at, but it will only take you so far. And it eventually gets to a point where your skills are kind of capped, and you need other people who can elevate you.
Right. Yeah, so getting back to the baking a little bit, what is it about baking that you like kind of fell in love with? What's the thing that makes it so special to you?
I really like the creativity of it. I like the precision and weighing ingredients and turning those into something show stopping and spectacular that you look at and you say, wow, I cannot wait to eat that. That looks delicious. And so I love that element of precision, taste, texture, color. There's so many elements that go into pastry. It's not just throwing everything in a pan and seeing what happens. There's so many different stages where you can add your creativity. And that's what I really enjoy. And I like the journey of it, because it's not easy, because it's so precise. Things go wrong all the time, and they go wrong for me every single day. And I like the learning and the development that goes into it, because if you're great at making pizza, that doesn't necessarily mean you're good at making sourdough. You're great at making cakes, it doesn't necessarily mean you're good at making entremets. There's always something to learn, and I love that kind of exponential knowledge that there is to gain.
Yeah, I think baking is really unique because it can be so creative, but it's also a science at the same time. Like regular, cooking dinner, there's always a way at the end to be like, "Oh, it needs more of this," or it needs, something
Yeah.
else to like enhance the flavor. Whereas like baking, it's like when you get your final product, it's kind of what you got. And so if you didn't take the science into account in the beginning, you kind of end up with something that's not so great. But like you said, there's creativity along the way to be able to like tweak different flavors and stuff.
Big time. I totally agree with that. Yeah, and I'm a terrible, well, not terrible cook, but it's not my forte. And I don't like the idea of kind of just being able to do a pinch and a splash and a teaspoon. That's not me. I want it weighed out, everything to be precise so that I can get it exactly the same every single time.
Yeah. What are some of your favorite flavors to bake with?
You know what? I always say this. I'm such a basic baker. When I started baking, it was just being able to teach myself recipes I really enjoyed. So chocolate chip cookies or white bread. So still in my baking today, I make recipes with chocolate, lemon, hazelnut, caramel, really simple classic flavors. I'm not really one for miso or tahini, or that's not my bag. That's not really my expertise. And I just love classic flavors that you can elevate. So yeah, I'm a basic baker.
Yeah. I've always been curious how, I mean, because I'm a big fan of the Great British Bake Off, and I've
hmm
always wondered how bakers decide like what flavors go well together. How do you make that decision?
Yes, that's a really good question. I guess it's trial and error. I did something the other day with lemon. It was like a lemon cremo, like a lemon cream, and then also used a hazelnut praline milk chocolate fouilletine. So you've got kind of salty, oily, caramelized nuts with milk chocolate, which is quite sweet, and then a very tart citrus, lemon cremo. And I thought this might be a bit odd, but actually the combination worked really well. And I'm sure there's stuff I combine that's really weird, but it is a trial and error. Sometimes having things in your fridge that you can just throw into a tart and see if it works. But yeah, it's experimenting with things that you think you're going to like. If you love yuzu and tahini, put yuzu and tahini together. I mean, why not? If you like it, who cares?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
That's my attitude. I'm like, well, I like it, so I don't care what anyone else thinks.
You're right. Yeah. So in your process of learning how to become a better baker, what do you feel like are some of those like essential skills that you would recommend any new baker learn?
I think the first thing I would say, not necessarily a skill, but is a piece of equipment, would be a digital scale. So, like we've said, baking is all about precision. And if you start using cups and teaspoons, it's just inaccurate. People might disagree, but it is, because 1 cup of flour is, I've got about 5 different cup measures, and they all measure different amounts of flour. But if you want something to be really consistent every single time, you'll never see the best pastry chefs in the world using cups.
Mm.
So get yourself a digital scale; it will be super accurate. And then a skill, this again sounds silly, but really read the recipe through, because I'll start at the top of a recipe, just keep going down. And it's like, oh, now chill it for half an hour, or you should have let it rest for 45 minutes, or I should have turned on my oven. And I haven't really prepped myself very well. So if you read the recipe, you kind of know what the next step is, and then you feel confident going through it. And then be ready to fail. In baking, a really good skill is taking on a failure, kind of absorbing that knowledge and turning it into a positive and saying, okay, I chopped the chocolate too fine, and that's why it melted so much. Actually, next time I'm going to leave it nice and chunky. I really like the flavor and the texture, but dang, I wish I'd changed the texture of that chocolate. And so that's how I learned, was just failing, taking on that kind of negative aspect of baking, and then turning it into a positive by thinking, oh, well, next time when I remake that, this is what I'm going to do. You
Mm.
almost get scarred, to be honest. You get scarred from the failures, and you're like, oh, what an error. I'm so annoyed at myself. I'm never going to do that again.
Yeah, I think that to me, there's like a barrier to entry when it comes to like baking something that seems really fancy. And honestly, it's reading through the recipe and being like, oh my gosh, there's so many steps here.
Yes. There can be a lot of steps, and I think sometimes it depends on who's writing it and what they're putting in the steps. I think it's important that every step has a purpose, but also when I write a recipe, I quite like to be conversational with it. It was almost like I'm standing next to you, like, hey, look, if you put the acetate here, it's not the end of the world if it's too long. Just patch it up and it will be fine. It's giving you the confidence as you're reading through the recipe. And it might appear really long, but it's comforting you and giving you the answers to questions you might already have or not have thought of and thought, oh, actually, yeah, that's really important. I wouldn't have even thought of that step. So yeah, the recipe, the recipes can be, especially if you're doing something like an entremet, which has 4 different elements and a glaze, and temperatures are important, or you're laminating doughs. And, it depends how deep into the baking world you go.
Right. Yeah, do you think that, is it just taking action is something that leads to more confidence in baking, or do you think that there are other things that people could do?
I think the first step is starting. So like if you're just starting out baking, starting with really simple recipes. If you haven't baked much and you start to make macarons, there's going to be some fundamental techniques that you will have missed had you just started with cupcakes and cookies and bread and whatever it is. And there's a lot of transferable skills in baking. So when you come to take on those more difficult bakes, you're like, okay, I do know how to hold a piping bag, or to add the piping nozzle and get a really steady motion as I'm piping the macaron. So my advice is always start simple with recipes that you really enjoy. So that's how I started. And then that will build your confidence and also teach you these kind of unknown fundamental skills that you probably thought weren't relevant, but actually really help you out later
Mm.
on.
What kind of recipes do you really enjoy?
Gosh, I love making tarts, anything with pastry. So in the book, I grew up. My dad, like I said, was a Michelin star chef, and he had this very famous lemon tart recipe, and it is the best lemon tart. I've really tried to find an alternative. I've tried many and many restaurants' lemon tarts, and nothing compares. And so lemon tart is my favorite. But anything, chocolate tart, chocolate and caramel tart, anything with pastry and a filling, I am obsessed with, because I just love that, the beauty of it, the design you can add to it, and the color and the texture, but also all the different layers and flavors you can add. A tart for me is just a blank canvas of flavor and texture.
Do you and your dad make the tart the same way? The lemon tart?
I've kind of adapted it. So as I got better and better at pastry, I learned new techniques that he wasn't really aware of, because he's a lot older now. And so he's not up to date with, the new fancy techniques. And so I've kind of made it slightly more professional by the way I make the pastry and how I roll it out, and heating the mixture slightly before it goes in the oven. So his is quite an old school way of making it. Still the same recipe, but I think mine turns out better. And he has agreed mine is better now, but he begrudgingly says, "Okay, yeah, yours is better, man."
Well, to be fair, he's not I'm assuming he wasn't trained as a pastry chef, right? He was trained as a
He did a little bit. So there's a very famous hotel in London called the Connaught, and he trained in the pastry section at the
Oh,
Connaught.
okay.
He was a chef though, like that was his bread and butter, making proper main hearty meals, French classic, English classic dishes. So he's not an expert in pastry. Well, if I said, "Dad, make me a donut," he'd have no clue.
Right. Okay, so I do really wanna talk about your 3D printer recipes.
Yes.
How did you get started with that? What's the origin?
Gosh, well, there's a really famous pastry chef on Instagram who I'm sure you've come across. His name's Amari Gouchon,
Mhm.
and he makes just the most incredible desserts. Makes
He
chocolate
does, like, the big
sculptures.
yeah, the chocolate
Yeah,
sculptures, right?
giant
Yeah.
chocolate sculptures, and he kind of pioneered this sort of 3D. He started using 3D print to create very small elements that he could create silicon molds from. And so I was always been interested in design and thought, well, I can buy a 3D printer and create a custom mold, because sometimes a silicon mold for something is really expensive, or it's not the right shape or the size, or you want something quite unique. And I thought, you can get desktop vacuum forming machines now. I thought, well, if I can 3D print a shape that I can't get anywhere else and put it into a desktop vacuum forming machine, I can create any mold, any shape I want. And it opened up just a world of possibilities, because I'm not saying I came up with the most creative designs or shapes, but I was able to just come up with these crazy ideas in my head that no one else had done before. So I made a 3D printed cupcake. So I 3D printed the piping, I 3D printed the cupcake case, and it looked like a cupcake, but it was immaculate. Every detail was perfect because I'd measured it, I designed it all, and it was unique because no one else had ever done it. And what I love about that, the 3D element and all that, is creating things that no one's ever seen before. And not necessarily, crazy shapes or anything like that, but it's doing things that no one has ever created. And I love that idea of being a pioneer within pastry.
Right. Well, I think I saw on your Instagram feed that you had this, I don't remember what the cake itself was, but you had like a white cake and had like different colored geometric shapes on top.
Yes.
And it's like a work of art. It's so beautiful because it's like the contrast of something that's like handmade plus things that are like precision made that you just don't often, I think, get with a lot of baked goods is like you get the contrast of it that
Mhm.
makes it look like, oh, this could be on like a canvas or something. It's really
So
cool.
that was a really cool one because I found an artist on Instagram who made so he'd use like square wide canvases, then he'd make paper shapes similar to the kind of triangles, and he'd arrange them in these crazy patterns. I thought I can turn that into a dessert. So I tagged him in the post, but I loved the vision and the color he used of, again, like you said, this juxtaposition of a very blank white canvas and then these bright pops of color from the triangles arranged in these unique formations. I was like, I'm going to do that. And so I 3D printed little squares, vacuum formed them, created all these different colors, and put it onto a white dessert. And it was really fun. It wasn't as beautiful as the canvas he made, but again, it was this trial and error of creating something unique that no one had ever done before.
Yeah. I think that this 3D printer idea to me feels like it goes along with your personality because you seem to really like the precision aspect of things
Big
and the
time.
perfectionist aspects of it.
Big time. I don't know when it really became my thing, but I just love precision. I don't like failing at anything. Like I said earlier, if I'm gardening or making a cocktail or whatever it is, I want to be the best. And I know I'm not necessarily going to be the best, but I'm going to aim for that and fall somewhere just slightly short of it. And so adding that precision element, and I love the aspect of doing something, saying I've done something no one's done before. I love that. It's like arrogance, it's your ego. But I was like, yeah, I was the first person to ever do that. So I did a dessert the other day, which was using the Threads logo. So Threads is obviously really popular now. And so I 3D printed an app shape and I 3D printed the Threads logo. And I kind of sprayed this dessert to make it look like the Threads app icon. Like no one had done that before. It was simple, but it was fun and creative and creates conversation. I just love being able to say, hey, I was the first person that made that.
That's really cool. I'm imagining your kitchen right now being like half standard baking items that people would totally expect to see, and then like half of it is like weird gadgets and like almost like you have like a tech side of your kitchen.
I'm literally looking up from my computer. I've got two 3D printers. I've got a cutting machine, four cameras, 3D printed molds. Like all above me is my tech, and then I go into the kitchen. There's like KitchenAids and bowls and spatulas. So yeah, got two sides to the house: the tech and the kitchen.
That's so fun. So I know that previously, I don't think that you're doing any right now, but you've been like a TV show host and like a judge on different baking shows. How did that come about? Was that just because your YouTube channel got so popular and people invited you to do that? Or did you like seek out being on TV as well?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I didn't mention this earlier, but I started my career as a guy called Topless Baker. So essentially, I cooked with an apron on. This is why I went so viral. I cooked with an apron on, but without a shirt on. So I was quite muscly at the time. I was quite young, and I went really viral for that and got a lot of media attention. And so a guy from Food Network messaged me and said, "Hey, I'm a producer at Food Network. Would love to bring you out to the States for kind of an audition." So I'm 24, I think, at this point. I'm in America. I get picked up in a blacked out BMW. I'm thinking like, this is it. I'm the next Jamie Oliver. I'm going to be so famous at the end of this. There's water in the car. He's got a suit on. Anyways, I did this audition, and then nothing came of it. Nothing. They never said, "Oh, we're going to give you a show. We want you to be on this." And it wasn't until probably 3 years later, I've been in touch with this guy, and he emailed me and said, "Hey, look, do you want to come be a judge on the show?" And I didn't have to audition, nothing like that. He literally just sent me an email out of the blue, and I'll never forget that day because for me it was just really the pinnacle of my career and how much I'd worked to get to that point, and that was my dream to be on Food Network. And so I remember getting that email and just screaming and just thinking, "This is it, this is it." And yeah, I got an email and flew out to America, and kind of one show led to another, and then kind of once COVID hit, they kind of stopped bringing me out because obviously we couldn't travel. And so I started doing more TV here in the UK. But yeah, honestly, it was just an email from an audition that I'd done years and years and years before.
That feels like it would be such an honor to be like since you're a self-taught baker, like, there's an aspect of that that's like, wow, like, you were the one who did this for yourself, like, it
Yeah.
wasn't like, "Oh, I went through years of culinary training, and so, like, of course, like, I deserve to be in this spot," like, there's something that's so special about being a self-taught baker and then being asked, like, to judge other people's bakes. That's so
Yeah.
cool.
But what's hard about that as well is, I'm self-taught, so I'm kind of pigeonholed in what I want to learn. So cookies, bread, sourdough, whatever it is. And I go on these shows, and American baking is quite different to European baking. So the first one I did was a cookie challenge show, like sugar cookies, and I've never never made sugar cookies before and done royal icing decorating. And these contestants were making 3D sculptures from cookies with royal icing and doing all these techniques that I'd never even tried. I'm sat there as a judge thinking, I would have gone out in the first round of this. Their skill was beyond what I could do. I did another show where they were sculpting cakes with um, Rice Krispies and marshmallow and making, giant figurines. I couldn't do any of that. And I was having to kind of offer opinions, say, well, they should have done this, or the consistency of the buttercream was wrong. But actually, I had no idea. But that is, that's part of the game of being a judge. If they'd put a tart in front of me, I would have lit them up because I would have known exactly what I was talking about. But it's always interesting, depending on the show and the format, of what's being presented to you and what you have to judge, and if you have the knowledge of that particular item.
Yeah, that's so interesting that you say that because it does make me realize there are a lot of even you just talking about tarts so much, like, obviously have some tarts here in the United States, but it's not those are not our most popular dessert items
Yeah,
by any means, and most of them are basically like a kind of like a plain vanilla, like, custard
custard with fruit on
yeah,
top.
with some
Yeah,
strawberries or something on top, like, they're very basic. Um,
yeah.
what's something that's kinda, like, unique, I guess, to, like, maybe American baking that you, like, realize that you really love?
That's a really good question. Wow, I'm gonna have to ponder this. I haven't been to the States for a while. I'm trying to think what I've eaten recently. I guess the creativity in the States is very different. The colors, the when I'm thinking about cakes and cookies and tarts, everything is very colorful and very American. The fact that it's bigger and bolder and more dramatic, and everything in Europe's very kind of subtle and precise. It's not too loud. Whereas I think when you go into a bakery or you go on these shows, everything they do has this wow factor to it, which I think is really impressive. And everyone is very confident when they're going into it. They could be the worst baker ever, but they go into it so confident. I've got a bakery in Atlanta, and it's incredible. I love the confidence they exude as they go into things. But yeah, it's a very different style of baking, and it's not quite as clean and precise, but it's very loud and big and extra, and I like that.
Yeah, I don't think I'd ever heard of, like, shoe buns or shoe pastry before I
Mm.
started watching The Great British Bake Off. Like, I was like, "I don't know what that would taste like at all," until, like, one time, I think when I, went to France, like, we went to a little, like, pastry, what do they call
A
them?
patisserie
Boulan
shop, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, like a little
boulangerie.
pastry shop, and,
Yeah.
yeah, and we had some there, and I was like, "Okay, this makes a lot more sense now," but it was actually really funny because I don't remember, there was one season of the Great British Bake Off in particular where they it was like every single week they had to, like, add shoe buns to a different thing, and I was like, "I don't know what this is."
Oh, and it's tough as well. I think the technique of shoe bonds has come on such a long way, and the conditions they put them under to make those items is so difficult. I'm thinking, I want to freeze this overnight and add a crackle in, and they don't get to do any of that. So
Yeah.
you judge it and you think, oh, he's done a terrible job. Actually, you have to make that in an hour and a half. Hasn't been able to do all these fancy techniques that would improve his shoe patience. It's tough. It's really tough.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about your cookbook a little bit. I think by the time this podcast comes out, I think your book will be published already, which is really
Cool.
exciting for you. What's your favorite part of making the cookbook?
Wow. I guess proving to myself that I could do it. You sign a deal for a cookbook and you have a rough idea of what you're going to do, but then you really need to figure it out. They say, okay, go away, come up with 70 recipes. But I don't have 70 recipes off the top of my head. And so it's kind of formulating all those ideas that you go on dog walks and in bed and putting them on a piece of paper, testing, 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 and then actually seeing them come to fruition in a book is amazing. And even, I tested them at home and how they looked on the final photo shoot was 10 times better because there's just that added element of pressure of, okay, this is the photo. You've got a beautiful camera and props and a food stylist, and everything just takes it to the next level. And seeing it all come together because it's a long process. It's, by the time the book's out, probably about 22 months. It's close to 2 years of work until it finally comes out. And so to see that, regardless of how it performs or how many it sells, to have a physical copy of your book is such an achievement. Again, for someone as a self-taught pastry chef who 8 years ago was shirtless cooking and had no idea what he was doing, to hold what I think is one of the most stunning patisserie books available is such an accomplishment for me,
Yeah, and the book really is beautiful. I got my copy in the mail a couple days ago, and my husband
isn't
and I
it?
were flipping through it, and he was even like, "Oh my gosh, the photos in here are so pretty."
Yes. And I think, this, you can be confident in yourself and arrogant, but I look at it and think there's no book in baking that compares, even like physically quality wise, not even about the recipes and how it's written, but actually the physical paper and the way it's printed and the texture of the cover. I don't know any book that for that, so cheap as well. Like, the Amazon knocked the price down so much. It's so cheap, and for the quality you get is really second to none, I think.
Yeah, I actually this is, I mean, I we love a lot of digital recipes and stuff, but there is something really special about a physical cookbook and that there is like a really good texture and like the weightiness of the paper and
Yeah.
stuff to this cookbook that I really like.
That's very kind. I appreciate that. I do. I love to see people's reaction when they get it and they see it for the first time. Like, wow, like the quality. Because I didn't know really what I was getting either. They kind of tell you, oh, it's going to be this blue texture and there's going to be gold foil and we're going to use this paper. But I'm not, I've never written a book. I've got no idea what that stuff means. So I finally got it in the mail. So just thinking, oh my goodness, this is premium. This feels incredible. And I think when you flick through it, it's matched with the quality of the photography and the fonts. And there's a lot of decisions that go into it, deciding how it's going to look. But also, I hope the recipes in there are approachable, even though they're photographed really beautifully and they look very clean. There is a lot of stuff in there that anybody can do, or someone looking just to level up their baking and do something more advanced and more professional. So I hope it covers a lot of grounds for a lot of different skills of bakers, and I think that's why it's quite a unique offering.
Well, I think you did a good job making the recipes approachable. So, like, let's talk about that a little bit because I think that this recipe book has, it's unique in the way that you
Mm,
have it formatted. So, for all the listeners who haven't seen the book yet, each recipe has a tier 1 and a tier 2 version of the recipe. So, it's like the more basic to maybe like lower level intermediate version of the recipe, and then a more like upper intermediate to advanced version of maybe not the exact same recipe because there's, like, some tweaks, in different flavors or
yes.
something, but, um, I thought that was so cool because the photos are gorgeous, and some of the recipes are like, "I don't feel like I could make this in 1,000 years," but those are, like, the tier 2 level recipes, whereas a lot of the tier 1 recipes, it's like, "Oh, all I need is, like, some muffin tins, and I can
Yeah,
make, my own," is it the
Financiers. Yeah,
financier? Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. So, which one of my favorite desserts. So,
Oh,
uh, I just, I really love that. So, like, talk me through, like, yeah, what was the process of doing that? And, like, how did you decide what was gonna be a tier 1 and what was gonna be a tier
mm.
2?
So it again goes back to kind of what I was talking. When I taught myself to bake initially, I just started with really simple recipes I like, cookies, breads, blah blah blah. And then as I followed a lot of people on social media, I saw these techniques and flavors and textures they were adding. And I thought, how do I take those simple recipes that I'm now good at making, cookies and breads, and elevate them into something more professional? And so that was how I got better. It was taking simple recipes and elevating them with a new flavor or a new design or a color or a mold. And so that's what I wanted to put through the book, because I think it's a fantastic way of learning and getting better at baking. And so that tiered approach was my pitch. For years I've had this idea, and it was just finding the right publisher who would kind of run with it and really do it justice. And so picking the recipes, it is like, 70 recipes, more than 70 recipes is a lot. It really is a lot. And also having to ensure that it has that fundamental connection of tier one to tier two. There were definitely some nights where I was thinking, how am I going to connect this? How am I going to take this tier one cake and level it up? Like I have no, I was changing designs at the last minute, changing piping nozzles or molds. It was honestly really difficult, but it was just about putting my favorite recipes in a book. So again, I didn't want anything that was trendy or anything I didn't really like to eat. It was all just recipes that I love to eat and enjoy and would bake for myself, and taking you through that progression of tier one to tier two.
Right. Yeah, when I was the my first, like, look through of the book, actually, I think it's the very first cake recipe in the book is this, like, beautiful chocolate cake recipe,
Yeah.
and the tier 1 recipe is just the cake in a loaf pan, and I
Mhm.
flipped over to the tier 2 recipe, and I was like, wait, this is, like, the same cake recipe?" Because the second recipe
Yes.
is, like, this beautiful, you could make it like a two-tier cake kind of a thing. I was like, "Oh my gosh," like, to me, it makes the second tier feel much more approachable to be like, "Oh, well, if I could make the one in the loaf pan, like, it's literally just, like, putting it in a different style of a pan and making
Yeah,
a little ganache." Um,
exactly.
so that was really cool, like, that instant realization of, like, "Oh, these 2 are related." Like, if I could do this one, which does seem so simple, then probably I could try this second version.
Exactly. I mean, even I was getting help, styling that second cake. There's challenging elements to it, but it is that idea of, it's just the same recipe. You're just reformatting it in a different shape and adding one extra skill level, which is making a ganache. And actually, what really makes that cake stunning is using a scalloped cake scraper. So you could just create straight sides and pour a drip on it, but this scallop cake scraper, I think, is a very kind of American grocery store supermarket
Uh-huh.
feel, which I love, and is really nostalgic for me, having gone to America growing up. And so I love that kind of scalloped shop bought effect to the cake. But again, it's just the simple fact of using that scraper instead of a flat edge scraper, and it takes it to another level and makes it look like something you buy from a bakery.
Mhm. It really does. Does writing Was writing these recipes something that came natural for you? Like, writing the recipes and writing the cookbook, was that all something that came naturally for you? Was that, like, an additional skill to learn in the process of making the cookbook?
Yeah, it's a good. So when I first started writing recipes, I had a slightly different technique, which I still really enjoy to do. Is when you see a recipe, they put the ingredients to the top and then they write a recipe, and if you get to the bottom of the recipe, you need to then scroll up to get the ingredients to the top. So when I usually write recipes, is I'll put the ingredients within each step. So you see, add the flour, sugar, and butter, and then you have the ingredients underneath that
Mm.
step. So you never have to look up again. With a book, it's not possible because there's not enough space. So that was how I originally kind of started recipe writing. So I had to kind of adapt that format. And so when we wrote the book, we wanted to make sure the recipe ingredients you could see quite clearly, kind of on the left hand side of the page, so you didn't have to look up or across or flick back or anything like that. But I guess there's an editor who edits the way things are written. So you'll send a recipe that you think makes complete sense and is perfect, and then your editor will have a really specific format of the way the publisher wants something to sound, or they use, let's say the publisher only uses sea salt flakes in all their books. It always says sea salt flakes, so you need to adapt the way you're writing. But you learn kind of as you're going. As you submit your first 10 or 20 recipes, you see all the red marks across the paper, and then you kind of slowly adapt. And once you get to the end, you're kind of well versed in writing recipes. But it was cutting out a lot of fluff. I like to, like I said, be very conversational. So it was cutting out wasted words that weren't an efficient use of paper and ink.
I could see it also being really helpful to have somebody who I don't know if your editor is a baker themselves, but I could see it being really helpful to have somebody who doesn't have like a high level of baking knowledge be able to proofread the things that you're writing and say, this is actually too technical, or, like this,
Mm.
somebody's going to read this recipe and be like, I don't know how to do this technique the way that you wrote it. So I can see that being really helpful too, to just like have that second set of eyes to make sure that you're not using too much jargon in your recipe writing.
Absolutely. I think it's also nice to have their validation as well. So as well
Mhm.
as writing the recipe, you have a blurb at the top that says, I love this lemon travel cake because blah 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 blah. And writing those is really difficult because that's very conversational and descriptive, and that's not what writing a recipe is about. This is, it's kind of selling the recipe. And so I wrote those and submitted them to her, and she was like, "Did you have someone write these for you? Like, these are really good." I was like, "Oh, really?" Like, I thought they wouldn't make any sense at all, but actually, she was like, "These are great. They really flow with the book." And she barely made any edits to them at all. I was like, "Oh, okay." So actually, I was probably better than I thought. But writing kind of introductions and explanations for eggs and sugar and flour, that stuff was tough because it's like, how do I explain flour? Okay, here we go. I'm going to talk about protein and different types of flour. And, there was research on my end to make sure I was correct in what I was saying because I might know it in my head, but actually putting it on paper, a lot of things I had to double check.
Yeah, sure. Well, and I like those little descriptions that you have for the recipes as well, particularly because if you read the tier 1 and then the tier 2 recipe, it's easy. Like, you do a good
See the
job of
connection.
showing the connection between
Yeah.
the 2, which once again, I think makes the harder version of the recipe feel more approachable to be like, "Okay, if I mastered this one, here's
Mhm.
how this one is just slightly elevated."
Yeah. And I just like the idea of being able to almost use the whole book. It's a lot of recipe books I pick up. I'll pick one recipe and it's very isolated in what it is. It's not connected. Whereas I feel like with the book, there's a journey
Mhm.
that you can go through. Elevating your skills. Whether someone bakes the whole book, I don't know, but hopefully there's someone that picks up the book and maybe they just focus on 4 or 6 or 8 recipes and they start in the tier 1 and they elevate through to tier 2 and they see that learning the purpose of the book really comes true for them, and that would be really special for me for
Mhm.
sure.
Are there any particular recipes that you want to, like, highlight or talk about that you just
Wha
really loved?
I've already talked about the lemon tart, so I won't mention that again, but definitely try the lemon tart. I'm also a really big fan of the chocolate cake, like you said. So the first recipe I said earlier was a chocolate orange cake that I made from Nigella, and it was so bad. So I had to make a chocolate orange cake for the book to kind of, I don't know, make up for the disaster I had the first time I ever started baking. So that chocolate orange cake is really stunning and also a very soft chocolatey sponge. And kind of as you work your way towards the end of the book, the kind of final probably 3 or 4 recipes like are the pinnacle of the book. These are you're ready, you're so advanced, this is it, you're going to take these on, you've mastered everything, you're so confident. And there's a laminated brioche cube in there, which is actually on the covers of the book. So if you flick the book open, you'll see this kind of honeycomb structure, and that's the inside of the brioche cube. And it's a really challenging recipe, like I will not lie, but it is stunning because it's like a croissant but baked in a perfect cube mold. And when you cut it open, you get this amazing lamination inside, and you fill it with a diplomat cream. And it is just for me the epitome of talent. Like if you can produce that at home, which you can do, it's better than any bakery you'll go to. It's just stunning. So for me, that's the real kind of crescendo of the book. I'm really proud of that recipe because it took me so long to figure out how to do it. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, that recipe to me looks like a deceptively hard recipe.
Hmm.
Like, when you look at the brioche cube, you're kind of like, "Okay, it's,
Yeah.
it's a loaf of bread in a cube shape," and then when you see it cut open, it's like, "Oh, wow, the air pockets in there with the lamination and everything." I can see how that would be incredibly challenging.
It is definitely difficult. And I was really umming and ahhing about whether I should put it in because it's one of those things where there's a few scraps left over and you need the right tin and you've got to have your butter at the right temperature. And if you do it in the summer, it's going to be difficult. But I wanted to have that kind of those few recipes at the end that were really, yeah, like I said, the crescendo of the book and just the pinnacle of talent and showing you that you can create. Because for me, it's all about showing that you can create professional looking recipes at home. You can make stuff better than a bakery and you can do it yourself once you've got the skills and the confidence and the knowledge. And so it's like, right, we're going to finish on this. This might be 3 pages long, but you guys, someone will make it, and I'm going to be so happy to see it when they do it.
Yeah, I love that. I really hope that you get tagged on Instagram or something when somebody masters that recipe.
Yes, the cube. Yeah, yeah. We had a lot of fun shooting it. That recipe was when it was the cube day. Everyone was just like, "Oh my goodness, the cube!" Because I kind of prepared them at home because trying to do it on set was going to be way too stressful. So I prepared them at home the night before, baked them, and then you don't know if you've got the lamination right until you cut into it. So it was a real mystery moment there when I cut open them, and the photographer was like, "Yes, we got it." I was like, "Oh goodness."
That's amazing. Is there anything that we missed that you wanted to make sure you mentioned?
I don't think so. I'm gonna be in the States kind of mid-September, so I'm gonna be doing a pop-up. So just stay tuned for that. I don't generally don't bake for people, so this will be my first stateside pop-up. So I've got a really good friend, Brian Ford, who his name's Artisan Brian. He really used
Yeah,
to.
he makes great I have his sourdough book. Yeah.
Yes, yes. So we're really good friends. We were on Food Network together. Back when he was just starting and he was so kind of fresh into it, and now he's just exploded. And so we're going to do a little collaboration together, which is going to be really fun. So, yes, I think that's probably the big thing as well as a book, because I'll be in the States. So hopefully doing like some meetups in New York City and doing some baking. So look out for that if you're stateside.
Excellent. Why don't you tell everybody where they can find you online and where they will potentially be able to buy your book?
Sure, yeah. So if you search into any social platform, just type in Matt Adlard, which is Adlard. I should hopefully pop up. There should only be one of me. And the book is available pretty much everywhere. So you can go to Barnes and Noble in the US, Amazon will have it absolutely everywhere. In the UK, Waterstones, WH Smith. So anywhere that any big book retailer, and hopefully lots of independent shops will also have it. And there should be signed copies available. So if you want a signed copy, just check my Instagram because I'm sure I'll be announcing it and they'll be available. I have a very squiggly signature though. I've been doing it this week. And I mean, this signature, I've had it since I was like 12 and it really doesn't do the book justice. So apologies if you get a signed copy, you think, what's his signature?
Well, we'll make sure we have a link in the show notes for everybody to check out the book and buy it. I think it's beautiful, and I think that it's going to be a great addition to anybody's cookbook library.
Yes. Even if you don't bake from it, it's going to look good in your
This
house
is
off the
true.
bat. Yes. It's a great coffee table book as well. Oh yeah, I'll flick through that. I won't bake the brioche cube, but I'm going to look at it.
Matt, thanks so much for joining me today. It's been so nice to talk to you.
Thank you. It was a real honor. Thank you. Thank you.
As always, thanks for tuning in to today's episode. I hope you enjoyed this conversation that I had with Matt. He is such a lovely person to talk to. We're going to have links to his book as well as his social channels in the episode description. So if you want to check out his beautiful book, you will be able to find a link there. And if you'd like to support the Plant Eat podcast, share this episode with a friend and subscribe on whatever platform you listen to your podcast. Thanks again for listening.